Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Priscilla Lister, and I'm one of the affirming committee from this church. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. It is hot, and people need to stay hydrated. So if you're not familiar with this church, just through those double doors on your immediate right is a water cooler. If you need water during the service, go help yourself. All right, let's begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe First People, the people of the three fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, with respect for their history, their spirituality, and their culture. We give thanks for God's gift of gathering in this space on this land. Could we assume an attitude of prayer? Holy One, we acknowledge that human diversity is an expression of your manifold love for your creation. We confess that in our brokenness as human beings, we turn diversity into a source of alienation, injustice, oppression, and wounding. We pray today for the grace to tear down walls that divide us and build bridges of understanding and unity. We praise you, God, for the gift of diversity in our world. Help us to listen more deeply and connect with others who may have different perspectives and backgrounds. Help to open our minds and hearts today as Michael leads us to a better understanding of ourselves and each other. We ask this in your holy name. Amen.
All I can say is, wow, thank you for coming. We welcome you. When we sent out our invitations, we had no clue how many would come, but we are over the moon. Thank you very much. Today's address is part of an affirming process of educational sessions we've called Lunch and Learning. No lunch today. Hope you ate lunch. But normally we would have them on a Wednesday morning, and we would bring our own lunch. Nobody prepared for anybody else, bring your own. And we would delve into one of the elements of our vision statement. And we did this many times, over 12 times over the last year and a half. And so this is part of the process. We're hoping to be designated as an affirming community of faith where we welcome people of all ages, health conditions, races, genders, gender identity, sexual orientation, family diversity, ability, economic circumstances, religion, spiritual, and ethnic background. We are hoping to have that vote in September, and we will see how it goes. We have been working with Affirm United. They have set down a fairly prescriptive process, which we have followed diligently. And I've worked with a committee that has just pitched in and just taken up the mantle and done the work. So today we are really fortunate. Michael Coren. After attending 2 universities in Britain as a young man, Michael returned to higher learning in 2016, graduating from Trinity College, University of Toronto. 3 years later, with a Master of Divinity honors degree, he was ordained in the Anglican Church of Canada in 2019 and made a priest in 2021. Michael is an award-winning writer, broadcaster, and columnist. Columns and opinion contributions can be found in Canadian publications such as Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, TVO, and in Britain in the Times and Telegraph, to name a few. Walrus was another one. He is the best-selling author of 18 books. Michael hosted a nightly television and radio show for 20 years, for which he has won numerous awards. Professor of History of the Church University of Oxford writes, by turns witty, angry, rueful, and moving, Michael Coren's passionate foray into theology and contemporary society is a huge, valuable contribution to the Church's rethinking of its approach to sexual morality. In reference to the book, The Rebel Christ, English actor, broadcaster, comedian, director, narrator, he's a busy guy, writer Stephen Fry says, "These essays reveal the integrity, wit, and passion of a fine advocate for the best of Christian thought and a faith that encompasses the human as well as the divine." Canadian David Frum says, "Fearless, unpredictable, funny, never boring. There's nobody and nothing like Michael Coren in journalism anywhere." By all accounts, then, we are in for a thought-provoking and memorable address. Please help me welcome Michael to Sauble Beach.
Well, I mean, how do I follow that? Now, important things first. It's half-time in the England-Denmark game right now, and the evil Scandinavians equalized just before half-time. Don't go to your phones now and share. No, let me edit that. If you do go to your phones and England score, do tell me. Otherwise, shut up. Now, I mean, thank you for inviting me. It was a long trip. My wife, apparently, used to come here when she was little for holidays. I don't mean this church, they're Catholic. I mean the beach. But I said, I'm going. And we used to go on holiday there. A lovely drive, particularly when you get out of the city. There's so much beauty up here. It's really quite something. Now, let me tell you a bit about... I'm an Anglican priest. And I should try to define for you what an Anglican priest is. Because they're a strange breed, really. I'll give you a story to illustrate it. Someone I knew, he was, he's retired now, he was a hairdresser. He wasn't even a hairdresser, he was a barber. You know those old-fashioned barber shops? Well, there's a lot of you over there, and I'm over here for some reason. But anyway, so yeah, this little barber shop, short back. He didn't do my hair. I do that myself. But it's the sort of thing he would do. You know, anyway, one morning, ding on the bell, the door opens, and a Roman Catholic priest came in for a haircut, and my friend cut his hair very quick. And the priest went to pay, and my friend said, "Look, Father, I'm not Catholic. I'm not even religious, to be honest, but I admire religion. I admire the good work. I know the good work you do. It's my gift for you." And the priest said, "Well, that's very kind of you. That's very kind of you indeed." And the next day, the barber went to open the shop, and there was a big bottle of Irish whiskey waiting for him. Lovely. About a month later, ding, ding, door opens, and rabbi comes in. A reform rabbi comes in, sits down, has his hair cut at the end, he goes to pay, and my friend said, "No, Rabbi, I'm not Jewish, I'm not religious, but huge admiration for your people, and please, this is my gift to you." And the rabbi said, that is a mitzvah, that is what a lovely thing to, thank you so much. And he leaves, and the next day, my friend goes to open the shop, and there's a big bag of freshly baked bagels waiting for him. About a month later, an Anglican priest walked in, sits down, haircut at the end of it, the Anglican vicar goes to pay, and my friend said, "No, look, I'm not Anglican, but I had a priest in here, and I had a rabbi, and same for you, it's my gift for you as a man of the cloth." And the Anglican vicar says, "That's very kind of you, thank you very much." And the next day, my friend went to open the shop, and there was a long line of Anglican clergy. That is, you're laughing too much, by the way. That is a very good definition. Now, a little bit about me. Obviously, I wasn't born in Canada. I was born in the UK. I came here, I've been here most of my life. I haven't lost the accent, but I came here when I was 28. And the reason I'm here in Canada, and this is a completely true story, is in 1986, there was a conference at the University of Toronto. I'm picking it up as I go. University of Toronto, St. Michael's College, there was a conference on a writer called G.K. Chesterton. He died in 1936, and the 50th anniversary was 86. That meant he was out of copyright in some parts of the world, and it was an anniversary. They had a big academic gathering, and they had experts from all over the world. And me, because I was writing a book about G.K. Chesterton. And I'm not an academic. It was just, I've written a few biographies over the years, and I was writing this book. And I was much younger than any other speaker. I was then 27, I suppose, and most of the speakers there were getting on. They were senior academics, and they gave these very dry papers. And then I gave my paper. It was pretty dry. I read every word. It was a well-researched paper on a particular aspect of the life of G.K. Chesterton. And at the end of the conference, there was a big sort of cocktail party, because it was a big thing, 200 people or so there. And this very beautiful young woman came up to me. And I don't know if she was drunk or not, but she came up to me and she said to me, "You're amazing." And thinking this would never happen again, I married her. And I was right. It hasn't happened again. And after 37 years of marriage, I don't think she's ever said it again either. But that's why I'm here. I married a Canadian, and that's what brought me to Canada. I've been here most of my life, and the country's been very generous to me. We have 4 children. 3 of them live here. One is in Seattle. He's a professor there, but the other 3 live here. And a generous, wonderful, not perfect, no country is perfect, but a wonderful country. A wonderful experiment, I think, in humanity. That's getting better in many ways all the time, but there are things to watch as well. My first job here was with the CBC, actually, a show called Man Alive. Do you remember Man Alive? Some of the older people here might remember it. I worked there for a year and began writing for various newspapers, and I've made my living as a journalist and author. And I won't go into the details. We'll have questions and answers. You can ask me anything, but I had a major change in my life about 12 years ago and led to me eventually studying to be ordained, which I never, ever thought I would. I mean, until a couple of years ago, I still assumed I'd be playing football for England. Mind you, the team they have right now, maybe I still will be playing football for but, I mean, I never, ever thought I would be a cleric, a priest. I thank God every day I am. I so relish what I do. But it's been a quite circuitous journey and a complex one in many ways. But I still write. I write actually more for the British press now than for the Canadian. Canadian media is shrinking very, very sadly and badly. It's quite worrying, in fact. It's one aspect of Canada that does disturb me. But I write a lot, and I'm half-time as a priest in Burlington. And I speak and preach about what it means to be a Christian and what I suppose Christianity means. I'm not a theologian. I'm just a journalist. I'm not a fool. I'm not going to be falsely humble and modest. I'm not a stupid person, but I'm not layered in decades of theological study. Actually, thank God for that, because very often I find theologians have this amazing ability to make beautiful, clear subjects seem very complex and obscure. Another story I'd like to tell you, and I'm pretty sure this is true. Some of these stories are passed down. You're never quite clear if they're actually genuine or not, but I'm pretty sure this one is true. And it describes the anniversary just a few weeks ago. After D-Day, British troops advancing after the initial Normandy campaign further into France, and a unit of men, and they'd been together since the very beginning, since late 1940 actually. They'd lost some friends along the way, but this group had been together for a while. They survived the beaches. They were still together, and they're advancing through France, and they're in a firefight, and they overcome the enemy, the Nazis. They overcome them, but in this firefight, one of their friends is killed. And they have orders, and they know they have to keep advancing, and they don't know what to do. They're fairly isolated. And then they see a steeple of a church over a couple of hills. So they carry their friend to the church, and they knock on the door, and this elderly Roman Catholic priest, it's France, opens the door. And in broken French and broken English, they communicate, and they say, "We'd like you to bury him." And he says to them, Was he Catholic? Was he Catholic? And they look at each other. No, don't think so. He said, I'm sorry, I can't bury him in a Catholic cemetery. And they're getting quite angry at this point. And you can imagine what these men have gone through. These are hardened warriors and heavily armed. And they say, what? He says, no, look, please listen to me. I will bury him. I will give him full honor. I'll bury him just outside the fence of the cemetery. He'll be just outside the fence of the cemetery. And I will go and pray every day. But I can't do any more for you than that. And they're not completely happy, but they agree. And they have to move on. And they move on, and eventually, less than a year later, the war is over. And they're told they can go home, and they are going back. And they're quite away from where this happened and where the church is, but it's only about a couple of hours of marching, and they've got time on their hands now, and they decide they'll go and visit the grave of their friend. And they find the church, and they go to the cemetery, but their friend isn't there. They look at the spot where he was buried, just outside the fence of the cemetery, and he is not there. And now they're angry. And they go to the church door, and they bang on the door. And these men are ready to commit violence. And the priest opens the door, and one of them grabs him and says, "Where is he? What have you done with him?" And the priest says, please, come with me. And they go with him, and inside the edge of the Catholic cemetery, his friend is buried. And the priest says to them, "I made the church bigger. I made the church bigger." I'm an Orthodox Christian. Some people say, "Oh, you must be very liberal in your theology." No, I'm not actually. I'm really quite conservative in my theology. That's not the issue. The issue is, as a Christian, as a follower of Christ Jesus, as someone who says the creed and believes it, I also believe the church has to be bigger. It has to include more people. Enough of saying no and more of saying yes. Open the doors wide, so wide they almost break off the hinges. That doesn't mean that we compromise on the essential truths of the Christian faith. And I may disagree with some people here on this. Doesn't mean we compromise on the fundamental teachings of the Christian faith. But that has led me to say, your sexuality is irrelevant. Irrelevant. The issue is not who you love, it is that you love. And I'm not going to dwell on this in this, what I'm going to say now, we can talk about it later, but in passing, I have seen such sacrificial, beautiful, pristine love between people of the same gender, men and women, some married, not all. I've been inspired by them. In fact, most of, and this is not hyperbole, most of the people who led me to change my views on my faith, because I'd never lost my faith, were actually gay men. I mean, it wasn't gay women for some reason. I'm sorry about that, but it was, I think of people like Richard Coles and Mark Oakley and Dermot McCulloch and even Stephen Fry, who's not a Christian, but has been a great inspiration and a dear friend to me over the years. These people really showed me what a real love was. And that's not to give any hierarchy of who loves who the best, but this notion that because God made you a certain way means that you're disqualified from worshipping God is heretical. That is sinful. To say to people, born a certain way, you are not welcome. You're made in the image of God. God made you this way, but you're not welcome in this church. That is heresy. The scriptural arguments, just very briefly, oh golly. I get very tired of people quoting me verses from Scripture. People who have no Greek, no Hebrew, but apparently know the Bible perfectly. The one I really love is when they quote the King James Bible to me. They quote the King James Bible, and I love it when I say, "Oh yeah, King James, he's my favorite gay king." Because he was. There haven't been that many, but he was. And he didn't do the translation, but he commissioned it. But they look very confused when you say that. But For example, just very briefly, lesbianism is never mentioned in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures. In the 870,000 words of the entire canon of the Bible, this issue is mentioned about half a dozen times, and then hardly directly. Sodom was not thought to refer to homosexuality until the, 12th, 11th century. It says in the Bible itself, the sin of Sodom was lack of hospitality, turning away the stranger. And think about the story for a moment. Everyone in Sodom is gay? My golly, 100%? That's impressive. Wow. And then we want to have sex with these male angels in your house. No, have my teenage daughters instead. Not really family values, that, is it? Maybe the Republican Party platform in years to come, but, understand what is said there. It has nothing to do with this issue. And then Jesus doesn't mention the issue, St. Paul does, but he's referring to straight men using boys for pagan initiation rituals. He's not talking about consenting, loving same-sex relationships. And the Greek is abundantly clear about that. There is one passage in the Gospels that is worth thinking about, and that's when the Roman centurion goes to visit Jesus and says, I love my slave. Now, slavery has to be taken in context. We think of African slavery, 18th, 19th century. Slavery was everywhere at this period. If you lost a battle, you assumed you'd either be killed or sold into slavery. It wasn't based on race. The Romans enslaved all sorts of people. There were black emperors of Rome. It wasn't race-based. Slavery was very common. It's very likely Paul's parents were slaves who were given their citizenship, became Roman citizens, as he did. Often people would become family members. They were loved. Very complex issue. The centurion who personifies everything the Jewish people of the first century despised. They're the chosen people. Yet Herod the Great and then his son, the two Herods, get very confused with Herods, by the way, in the New Testament. Be very careful. There are lots of Herods around. Even Herod the Great's father was a Herod, but they brought things not to do. Ask Rome to settle an internal dispute for you. Not a good idea. Rome takes over. Rome's dominant, in control of Judea. Herod the Great wasn't really even Jewish. His family were convert. All sorts of issues. They feel that they are not being welcomed anymore by God. What have they done wrong? And this Roman centurion personifies oppression, pagan oppression, the great authority of the Roman legions. And he comes to Jesus, and they look aghast. What? A Gentile, a pagan, and a Roman? And he says to Jesus, look, I love this guy, and I think he's dying. And I know you just have to say the word, and he will be healed. We said in the Eucharist, every Eucharist, only say the word, and I will be healed. I'm not fit to come into your house, I know that. And you don't have to come into just say the word, and I know he'll be healed. And Jesus says, your faith. I wish all my guys could be like this. Your faith. It's healed him. Go back. He's fine. Now, the Jewish people are on the edge of organized revolt. It'll happen in about 40 years' time, but there's constant violence going on. They hate their oppressors. They mock them. And one of the things they said was, the Roman soldiers, they go back to Caesarea Maritima every night, and you know what they do, don't you? Because they mock them. You're all homosexual. So this was the view that the Romans were homosexual. The Greek words that are used by the Roman centurion are very ambiguous. There are many words for love in Greek, in Koine Greek, even more in classical Greek. And when he says, I love this man, it's not directly romantic, but it's much more than platonic. Everyone watching this scene, apart from being stunned that Jesus is so welcoming to someone who they despise, they would assume, I'm not saying this is definitely true, but it's very worthwhile considering, they would think, what? He and his slave. They love each other. He loves him so much, he's come here to say, please heal him. Are you kidding me? Aren't you going to condemn him? Aren't you going to say you're going to hell? Now, I would never stand here and say this is overwhelmingly certain that this is describing a same-sex loving relationship. But I tell you what, it's pretty close to it. If it's not it, it looks like it, and it sounds like it, and it smells like it. But when you talk to people who are very, very, I have to use the term homophobic, and not everyone who opposes full affirmation is homophobic, and let's be careful here, and let's be loving and understanding of people. But I've received too many death threats and too much hatred and too much abuse to think that everyone who's opposed to full affirmation is loving and kind. And many of them are very hateful. But you can't have this conversation with them, because if you say this, they'll just get angry. If you say, David and Jonathan, my love for you is greater than the love of a man for his wife, what does that mean? You talk about all these relationships that seem to be very indicative of same-sex love that are throughout Scripture, and you just reject them to quote without understanding and context a few words in English translated from a Greek which you don't understand. I mean, if you really wanted to be strict about what Jesus said on moral issues, on family, personal moral issues, you probably know the biggie, and that's divorce. I fully understand divorce. I deal with people all the time in divorced marriages. What you try to do is to keep them as amicable as possible. It happens. But if you're going to be very legalistic and pedantic about what Jesus says, you'd say never to divorce. No. There is no church I know of that prohibits divorce. Roman Catholic Church, I was a Roman Catholic for many years. I wrote 3 books about the Catholic Church. Oh, please, annulment is just a clever way of getting around divorce. Be serious here. Annulment, there was never a marriage. We have 5 kids, doesn't matter, there was never a marriage. It's true. Annulment is very weird because you know what doesn't qualify for annulment? Domestic violence or adultery. He beats me. She's having an affair. I'm afraid that's not a grounds for annulment. It has to be you did not know what a Catholic marriage was when you got into it, even now that you have children. I'm not here to take shots at the Catholic Church, but it's a way of getting around divorce. Because divorce is inevitable, I'm afraid it does happen. And some of the most anti-gay churches in the evangelical wing of Christendom are led by, usually men, divorced men. Double standard, inconsistency, bunch of hypocrites, I don't know, whatever word you'd like to use, whatever term you'd like to use. It's certainly not a uniform application of Scripture. Let's put it that way. Because at the very epicenter of Jesus' teaching is the command which is incredibly difficult. And that is to love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and all your strength, and to love others as yourself. That's it. The other monotheistic faiths have laws, Islam and Judaism, God bless them, but there are things you have to do. There are things you have to do. There are laws you have to observe. Christianity is not like that. The very beautiful beating heart of Christianity is something that sounds simple but is incredibly complex. Love God with all your heart and mind and soul and strength, and love your neighbor, love other people as yourselves. Love is the great invincible theme that runs through the Gospels. If you're without sin, then throw a stone at her. I mean, that is such a marvelous, it may not actually have happened. The Gospel it's in, the chronology could be wrong, but it happened. I mean, people bring a woman to Jesus to try and show, is he going to be faithful to the law? Or is he going to really do that love thing he keeps talking about? What's he going to do? And his response is superb. Because what he says is, if you're not a hypocrite, let's have a conversation. If you are, get lost. That's what he says. If you're without sin, you throw the first stone, I'll follow. And they leave. Because they all know what they've been up to, and they're not bad people. They're just people, and we all sin. It's a marvelous use of the mirror, of reflection. A beautiful way of exposing people who want to be judgmental. And judgmentalism is the last thing that Jesus teaches. The Sabbath was made for us, not us for the Sabbath. All through Scripture, over and over again, his commands are revolutionary. I believe faith is extremely difficult as well as being overwhelmingly liberating. And there are times when I feel, almost tangibly, I feel Jesus' presence, but not all the time. There are times when I get it wrong. There are times when I just don't feel fired up in that way. I am very impressed with people who always seem to be on fire with the Lord or for the Lord, but it's not me. I have my good days and my bad days, but I don't have my days without belief in God, without faith in God, even though sometimes I don't live the way I should. I used the phrase before, the sandpaper of the soul, rubbing away. It can be painful at times. You're challenged. You have to rethink the way you behave. It's easy to apologize. The other day, my wife and I, we were changing something at Rona, which is an interesting thing to do. Anyway, after every screw and every bolt had been counted, I'm standing there, and my wife kept on trying to show this woman this other receipt. And I said, Bern, you'll just start again if you do. Don't just... Anyway, and I thought, that was a bit harsh. And it's easy to say to someone you love, I'm sorry about that. When someone has really hurt you, saying sorry is not easy. It's very, very difficult. But no one said that Christianity is supposed to be easy. And if you do find it easy, you're getting it wrong. When Jesus says turn the other cheek, my golly, that... carry his bag even further. I'm sure you know what that's about. A Roman citizen, certainly a Roman soldier, could just touch a non-citizen with the edge of his sword, not the sharp part, just the flat of the sword, and say, carry my bag. And you had to carry his bag. Imagine the humiliation of that. You are in my country, you are occupying my country, you are oppressing my people, you are taxing us half to death. And now you've said, carry my bags. And Jesus says, if he asks you to do that, carry it twice as far. They must have thought he was mad. They must have thought he was mad. But this galloping sense of turning the world upside down is really what the scriptures are about. The Gospels, and they were written so early, and I have these conversations with people sometimes. They have very strange ideas. Well, of course the Bible wasn't written until hundreds and hundreds of years. Paul was writing, 30-odd years, 35 years after the crucifixion and resurrection. The first Gospel was written about 40-odd years afterwards. These are very, very early. And the number of copies we have, really early, there's far more evidence for the accuracy and authenticity and reliability of the Gospels than for Caesar's campaign in Gaul, most of the Greek philosophers. But people don't want to hear that because they just want to react to what they've just seen on PBS, I suppose, or their latest reading of the Da Vinci Code. It's true. I believe it to be true. I don't understand all of it. I'm baffled by some of it. But I think it's supposed to be that way. I think Jesus was sent by God, as God, to die in agony, to show absolute, perfect solidarity with humanity, to die the death of humiliation on a cross. The crucifixion was so vile, it wasn't talked about in polite company. Even the Romans abolished it a couple hundred years later. To die a humiliating, agonizing death, to show solidarity with the suffering humanity. This man was born to a family living in close to poverty, would have made a living. His father, a skilled worker, maybe a carpenter, maybe not, but a skilled worker. In Galilee, a fairly lawless area. It wasn't Judea. The Romans weren't in charge in Galilee. Jews, Greeks living together, a lot of banditry. The Herod, before the Herod who was king when Jesus was around, put down a Galilean revolt. Terrible atrocities were committed. Very dangerous place to be. He was born to this family. His mother was a teenager, probably a 14-year-old Jewish girl. They travel to another country. They're frightened. They're unsure of what's going to happen to them. And he grows up and he surrounds himself with people who are not in the center of society. They're on the edges to a certain degree. Now, we can exaggerate this. Peter's name is both Greek and Hebrew, which probably indicates the family were bilingual and they were probably quite well off and educated. 90% illiteracy rate, remember, at this time. But a lot of the people around him could read and write. Peter probably employed some of the people who also followed him. But they were fishermen. A tax collector who was despised because, not like the wonderful people who today work for Revenue Canada, God bless them all, because you never know, one of them could be watching, and you do a wonderful job. But they were collaborators, because the Romans they weren't these maniacs, they weren't Nazis or anything, and they weren't genocidal. Well, they would if they had to be, but it was power. You do what you're told, you pay us money, you're okay. They were actually rather tolerant of Jewish practices and Jewish religion. They gave a lot of leeway to the Jewish people. But you have to pay your taxes. So what we'll do is we will have locals who will collaborate, and they'll say to them, we need, I don't know, $20,000 a year from you in taxation. If you raised $30,000, good for you. You've made 10 grand. We don't care. Not our business. As long as we get our 20 grand. And we'll give you a bodyguard, because otherwise they'll cut your throat. Imagine how they were regarded, how they were perceived by the other people in any occupied nation. So a collaborating tax collector is one of them, a former sex worker, a former terrorist leader, all these sorts of people. And the Galileans, and their accent was very noticeable, and it was a poorer society, and it was a lawless society. It wasn't the elite of Judea or Jerusalem. And he preaches mainly in fairly rural areas. He doesn't go to the big cities until near the end into Jerusalem. And everything he says, as I said earlier, turns the world upside down. Makes people rethink what they've believed for so long. And no caricatures here. It's not that the Pharisees are bad. The Pharisees were not bad. These were good people. These were men, separated ones. That's what it means, separated ones. Sorry. They were trying to hold on to the laws, more than 600 laws, because the Jewish people had been dispersed, they'd come back, they'd lost their language. A lot of their people had intermarried, Samaritans. That was why there was hostility between the groups. And they had a slightly different version of the faith. And the Pharisees are trying to educate people, often in rural areas. Nicodemus was a Pharisee, a great hero of Scripture. But they didn't quite get it. They don't quite get it, and they're waiting every moment of every day for the Messiah, and when he's standing there right in front of them, they can't see it. And then the crucifixion, and the Romans, were they such horrible people? It's just another day for them. It's just another day. I have very little patience with the movie The Passion. I think it removes all the humanity of the story and doesn't get it. The Romans, by the way, I have to say this. I don't know if you've seen The Passion, but he has the Romans speaking Latin. They didn't speak Latin. They spoke Greek. No one spoke Latin in the Eastern Empire. Even the royal family in Rome didn't speak Latin. They spoke Greek. Romans in Rome spoke Latin, but Greek was the language of the Eastern Empire. It was the language they communicated in. Anyway, but the legion there at the time probably weren't even Italian. They were probably Syrian and Samaritan, which would have made it even more problematic. But it's not, here's Jesus, let's give him a really hard time. It's, here's another guy to be crucified, let's give him a kicking, humiliate him, and get him up there. It's the banality of what happened, you see. It's the banality of evil. Just like anyone else, you are God, but we don't know that and we don't care. You're going to die. And we've been told to beat you and humiliate you first. And so they do it. They obey orders. And he is crucified. in this great leap of solidarity. And I believe in the resurrection. I believe in the resurrection. I believe he was seen first by women. Women are generally the heroes of the New Testament. Most of the Bible, actually. Women see him first, and they go back and they say to these men in the upper room who are frightened, "We've seen him." And they say, "Oh, no, come on. I know he said this would happen, but surely not." And they say, "We've seen him." And then they believe. And doubting Thomas, it's not doubting Thomas. He's realistic Thomas. He's me, he's you, I'm sure. "Hey, Thomas, you weren't here, but Jesus came. He was crucified." "Yeah, but he came here. He was with us." And he dares to say, "Guys, I'd need to see that myself." Well, who wouldn't say that? And Thomas, when he sees him, all he says is, "My Lord, my God." And then he goes to India. This is not apocryphal. There are lots of stories that aren't. My wife's family are from India. And there's overwhelming evidence that Thomas took the Christian faith to India, where he was eventually martyred. So doubting Thomas went all the way to India to take the Christian faith to people. And I believe that Jesus is here right now with us. I believe he's here in every act of love and friendship and kindness and forgiveness. I believe we're guaranteed eternal life. But we have to do this job properly and fully in relationship with Jesus. And that means showing unconditional love. That means understanding that because someone is different from you doesn't mean they're worse than you. Understanding that because it was the done thing 50 years ago doesn't mean it's the done thing now. It's looking beyond the first view, looking beyond the cover of the book into what is really going on. Feeling, empathizing. I left high school, golly, a long time ago, 1976, I left high school. And there was a big leaving party. I didn't really care, to be honest. I didn't enjoy, now it's a cliche, but I look back and think, wasn't school great? But I didn't really like it that much at the time. But I went to this party and chatting to people. And there was one particular couple at school. Their names were Jonathan and Angela. And they were very well known. And they were a couple. They were always together, like boyfriend and girlfriend. I didn't have a real girlfriend until I went to university. There were some couples there, but they were always together. And but it wasn't in that sort of annoying way that some teenagers have. Look at us. Look, we're the only people ever to have had a relationship. Look at us. And it wasn't like that. It just seemed natural and quite lovely. And they were very well known because they were very impressive people. Angela was gorgeous. Every guy in the school. My golly, she was a beautiful girl. And she was very athletic. She was in the do you have netball over here? She was in the school netball team. She did everything, and she was clever. And Jonathan was a very good-looking guy, very handsome. Again, all the girls thought, "Oh, isn't he lovely?" Which irritated me enormously. And he was captain of the school rugby team. I was in the rugby team. He was the captain. He was a good guy. He was clever. And here was the really difficult thing to deal with. Jonathan and Angela had all this going for them. Really good-looking, really sporting, really clever. And they were really kind and nice as well. And that irritated me enormously because if you're going to be that gifted, at least be unpleasant, then I can hate you. But they were lovely. They were really nice. And at this party, Angela was talking to me about what she and Jonathan were going to do. We assumed they'd get married. It just seemed inevitable. And I wasn't really listening. And that was it. And a few years later, I met my wife, came to Canada, didn't think about high school much. My oldest friend, Steve, was best man at our wedding. We were at school together. But that was about it. And then a few years ago now, quite a few actually, I was told that Jonathan and Angela had been abroad. They'd been in Africa, and they'd come back to London, England, and they were having a party. And everybody who was at school was invited to come along. do you want to come? And I thought, that'd be great. Great. I mean, part of me thought, let's go along and see if the people you really disliked have done very badly in life. That sort of thing, you know. And they said, well, there's actually this was before email was common. So it was a letter, and they said the invitation will arrive with the directions. It wasn't that formal. The directions, and in the directions was a little letter, and the letter said, we'd like people to know that something had happened. Jonathan and Angela had been in Africa and in a small village, and Angela had run, she'd been the principal, the headmistress of a two-room school. It was only about 30 kids. And Jonathan had been working as an engineer, and there'd been a fire at the school. And they'd got all the children out, but they realized there was a little boy called Joshua who'd been in the washroom, and he was stuck in the building that was on fire. And Jonathan had run back in, and he'd rescued Joshua, who was fine, and Jonathan was okay, but he'd received some quite bad burns. And they wanted people to know so they weren't shocked when they saw him. And I read the letter, and I did my sort of arrogant thing. I thought, wow, you know, I've been in war zones, I've seen terrible stuff, nothing's going to shock me. And I went to England in the second week of my time there on holiday. It was in the summer. I went to the apartment where they lived, and I knocked on the door. I was early, I think. And Angela opened the door, and she was more gorgeous than ever. And she said, oh, Mike, you're the first one here. Come in. Jonathan will love to see you. And I walked in, and it was quite a small, it was just like a one-bedroom with a kitchenette. And I walked in, and sitting in an armchair was a guy who I couldn't actually recognize because there was a great deal of scar tissue on his face, around his eyes, and I couldn't make out who it was. And it was very jarring, quite shocking. And I looked, and you try to register normal reaction, but it never works. You always give yourself away. And I'll never forget what he said, because even though I hadn't seen him in years, the voice was identical. He said, all right, Coren, he said, I know I look a bloody mess, but at least one of us has kept his hair. And I wanted to laugh, but instead of laughing, I choked up. And Angela put her arms around me and said, it's okay, Mike, don't worry, we've both done a lot of that. And then this little African boy, I hadn't seen him. He'd been in this kitchenette. He was very small, and he'd been sort of hiding behind the cupboard. And he ran out, and he jumped on Jonathan's lap. And he sat in his lap, and he started tickling him and saying, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And Angela said, this is our new adopted son. His name is Joshua. And then people began to arrive, and Angela and I sat and chatted, and I said to her, what's it like? How do you manage? And she said, we're okay, she said. And she said this, she said, you know, I used to walk along with Jonathan, and every second woman that went past turned round. I know how good looking he is. She said, every second woman who walked past would have looked round, and I feel very proud. She said, now we walk along together, and every person looks round. And she said, I'm more proud than ever. And I learned that night, and I hadn't learned because I was too busy, that they were Christian missionaries. And they'd gone to Africa, not to convert people, just to live the Christian witness, for her to teach, for him to work. He was a civil engineer by training, to try and bring clean water supply into the village, because some of the women who were going to get water would be raped by militias who were nearby. And they just devoted their lives to spreading the love of Christianity. And I've been too busy to listen. The very center of the Christian message. Once again, love God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul, and love every other person as yourself. If you get even that close to that in your lifetime, you perform miracles. But we try. And the idea of church is saying, everyone is welcome here, and not meaning it, I think God will have something to say to them. Once again, I'm an Orthodox Christian. I believe in the absolute truth of the Christian story. But that doesn't make me judge others. It makes me welcome others. It doesn't make me criticize people who are different from me, but embrace people who are different from me. That's the Jesus I worship, because that's the Jesus that I love. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Now the good bit. You ask really, really good questions, and I give answers. So, I know people are nervous, but don't be. And if you don't ask questions, I choose one person from every pew. And if you think I'm joking, I'm not. So, who's going to be brave and put up their hand for the first question? You got a microphone. It wasn't putting your hand up.
Used to watch you on TV. You were phenomenal. You talked about everything. You were such a critic of everything, and yet you made sense. When did you become a minister? When? Just curious. You had a column in a paper, too. I used to read it once in a while.
I still have a column. I have a column in lots of papers still. Oh. Well, I'll give you the answer to that. It's a long story, which, by the way, I write about at some length in that marvelous book out there, which is a mere $20, and Christmas is just down the road. I had a TV show. I had 2 TV shows. The first one was about 13 years, the other one just under 3 years. And I'm still on the radio every Monday afternoon for a bit. I had a radio show. I had News Talk 1010. I had, I suppose you call it an epiphany. About 13 years ago, as a Christian, I think I had something approaching maybe not a breakdown, but a crisis in my life. Not because anything bad was happening. Things were great in my life. But it actually was the issue of affirming, of equal marriage that really pushed me. Because I had met so many people. I'd always been very conservative on the issue. Not ultra-conservative. I always supported civil union and full rights of adoption and employment protection and housing, but I didn't believe in equal marriage. The problem was, though, because I was fairly articulate and not some hysterical fundamentalist, I think I did more damage than if I was more extreme. Because I would go on TV and say, yes, there has to be complete tolerance, and yes, civil union, and all the rights of everyone else, but not marriage. People would say, yeah, he's quite reasonable, isn't he? So I think I did more damage in a way. But it's a long time ago now. I was obliged to rethink that position through my relationship with, contact with gay Christians, actually. And too detailed to go into the whole story here, but it's just people I'd met, and they made me rethink. They didn't make me rethink. They led me to rethink. They didn't try to do anything. I just realized, you've got this wrong, Mike. You've got this wrong. And I found prayer very difficult. It was as though I was being obstructed. I couldn't find the person I claimed to worship. And there was something terribly wrong. And I began to meet with people in the gay Christian world and listen to their stories, and the forgiveness and the love was overwhelming. And when you change on one issue, you then change on others too. And I'd been in the Roman Catholic Church for a long time. I wasn't born a Catholic. I became a Catholic in the early 80s. For me, I couldn't stay in the Roman Catholic Church. There are many Catholics who would agree with me. But the teaching is still very difficult. The catechism is very, very severe on this issue and on many other things. On the abortion issue, I don't think abortion is a good thing, but nor do I think we should criminalize women for exhibiting, living out a fundamental choice and a right. And I've said this on a TV show in Britain a few years ago. I was attacked because I said, yeah, I'd like abortion rates to drop. You know how you do that? You have fully funded, completely available, universal daycare for children. You have good, modern sex education in all schools, free contraceptives. You give maternity leave for 1.5 to 2 years. You make sure men pay their paternity support. Also, this is how you reduce the numbers. Thank you. But not by criminalizing women. And this person, well, if abortion is wrong, you have to make it illegal. And I said, no. First of all, it doesn't work anyway. But also, How could you do that? And think about what you've actually said there, and think about the states that make abortion almost impossible. They are, without exception, the states in the US where infant mortality is the highest, where women are treated so badly, where racism is at its highest. You've got to, surely you can appreciate this is not just a coincidence. And I'm the father of 4 children, and we have a grandchild now as well. You're killing babies. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I want an intelligent, decent response to a very emotional issue. So in all sorts of things, I had to rethink, and I couldn't remain in the Catholic Church, in some ways out of respect for it. And it was a difficult time for me. And I began to go along I was working downtown Toronto, and the Anglican Cathedral was just down the road. And I began to go along to it at the 12:15 Eucharist. But I wouldn't receive the Eucharist, because as a Catholic, you're not supposed to. And then one day I did. And I found that I could be the Catholic I wanted to be in the Anglican Church. So I became an Anglican. And it wasn't an easy time. I'm not going to start playing the violin here. But, I mean, oh, golly. I've got a big Twitter following. Used to be bigger than it is now. But, I mean, the death threats, the abuse. They went after my children in the name of family values. It was really, I mean, I've got a thick skin. I can handle myself. It wasn't that bad. And fired from everywhere you can imagine. And I understood all the Catholic newspapers firing me because you're no longer a Roman Catholic. Fair enough. But I was the guest host on 100 Huntley Street. After Sun News closed down, 100 Huntley Street said, would you be our guest host? So I said, sure. And I did quite a bit for them. And then I had this list of all these dates I was booked. And then I got an email. I'm afraid we have to sever links with you over your views on gay marriage. And I wrote back and said, but I've never mentioned this issue on your show, and I wouldn't out of respect for you. And they said, yes, but people know what you think. So in the name of the living Christ and the gospel of love, they fired me too. Anyway, doesn't matter in the long run. It opened my eyes. If some boring old married straight guy like me gets that sort of garbage, what's it like being a 16-year-old gay kid in a rural part of Canada? So it was a wonderful lesson. I don't really want it repeated, but I'm glad I had it, because it is. Yeah. Thank you for that question. By the way, you look a bit like you should be in Led Zeppelin. There is that Jimmy Page, Robert Plant thing going on there, I don't mean 40 years ago, I mean how they are now. Good. Next question, please.
Michael, there's a lot of people here that are just starting out their affirming journey. Mm-hmm. Teach us how to have thick skins.
Teach you how to have thick skins? Ooh. Don't know if I can teach that. You're never, as a priest, I deal quite a lot with people who are in pain, grieving. They've lost their loved ones. You have to be very careful and do not give cliches. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? What I always say is, look, I'll just say this. You are not alone. I mentioned earlier this great divine leap of solidarity with humanity. There was a song some years ago, and one of the lines was, what if God was one of us? What if God was one of us? It wasn't a Christian song. And I think probably the assumption in the song was God is not. But the thing is, that's what it's about. God became one of us. God became one of us. This degradation of God to be a person, to come into the world at such a troubled time, not as an aristocrat or a monarch or a warlord, but as such an ordinary person. And God has suffered. God does know what that suffering is. And so when you're attacked, as long as you know you have truth on your side, and you do on that issue, and God is with you, then you'll be okay. No one is guaranteed an easy time of it. I mean, it can be rough, and that's not always a bad thing. It's all right, don't worry. Turn the volume off. I used to be really mean when if people's... once I even did this. It was right in the front row, and he wasn't turning... it wasn't that he couldn't, he wasn't turning the phone off. So I went down and I grabbed the phone, and I said, yeah, oh, it's his wife, hello. Oh, I think he left with his mistress, actually. There was no one there. But it got a good laugh. C.S. Lewis, if there's only one man, writer, thinker, it will be Lewis. I mean, I love Lewis. Wonderful, wonderful man. And he referred to the dentist. Have you never felt any pain at the dentist? Do you conclude from that the dentist is trying to hurt you because he wants to hurt you? No, it's going to make you better. I had an extraction about a year and a half ago. And at one point, I go, and he said, is this hurting? And I said, and he gave me some more numbing fluid. But life can sometimes hurt a bit. It doesn't mean that suffering has no point to it. We don't embrace suffering. We don't pursue martyrdom. That's neurotic. But sometimes we will be challenged. It happens. Use that. I mean, it's not the Nietzsche idea, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's not that. It's that realize why you may be getting a hard time. If the cause is righteous and good and pure and noble and Christ-like, then you will be okay, and you're not alone, and there is a greater purpose. And on the issue of being affirming, I think the people who should be worried are those on the other side, because I mentioned we have 4 children, 35 to 20, almost 26. And you can see with kids, as the generation, well, not the generations, but as the years go down, they can't comprehend homophobia. It's not that they're right on, we believe in equality. They're past that. They just don't know what it is not to be. How are evangelical and the Catholic Church, how are they going to work with kids in the years to come who say, well, if you discriminate against my gay friends, I ain't coming to your church? Because I know with our kids, and most young people I meet, discriminating against gay people is the same as discriminating against people of colour. And they just won't take it. So they're going to have to be... And it's not... If this was an issue where I just cannot see the way around this in Scripture, I just can't, I struggle, but I can't. It's not. I mean, I understand the arguments against full affirmation in Scripture, but I don't think they hold up to scrutiny. And they're certainly not overwhelming. Certainly not. So yes, of course you can easily see the arguments for... Look, it comes down to this. I've formed some very close relationships with gay men in particular in the past 10, 12 years. People I know deeply. They have never known anything other. They didn't wake up at the age of 12 and say, I think I'll be gay. They have never known anything other than I am attracted to, romantically, people of the same gender. And can we stop this obsession with sex? Because it really annoys me. I mean, without being too personal, my wife and I, we've been married for 37 years. How should I put this? If our marriage now was based entirely on sex, I will say no more. But, it's almost pagan, isn't it? This idea that it's all about sex. What about love? It's about love. And, no, I don't support promiscuity. I believe in the dignity of the human person. But I support love. And people who have only known romantic attraction to people of the same sex, you don't think that's God-pleasing? I do. I think God is delighted in a loving relationship between two people. And that's, I believe, profoundly biblical. So if you are attacked, if you can, relish it. Relish it, because you're being attacked for the right reasons. Question from over here. You've been silent. Come on, you've got to represent here. So who over on this side? Come on, don't, oh, yep, the young person over there. You are probably the youngest person here, you know.
Thank you.
How old are you?
I'm 24.
Good for you. Good for you. What are you clapping for? We've all been 24. I mean, we've all been there, so.
A follow-up question to what you said. So, like, when we're around work and people see, like, crosses hanging on our neck, they assume that they know what we believe. Even when we were talking to people that we were coming to hear you, they're like, oh, isn't that the guy? Like, why are you going to listen to him? How do we, like, educate without forcing our beliefs or, like, getting upset?
That's a very, very good question. Unfortunately, and I write about this a lot in my columns, the perception is very dark. And it's understandable because, and I'm not going to blame media. I mean, I've been in media a long time. Media doesn't do a particularly good job, and it can be very self-regarding. Whenever you see a movie involving a journalist, I think, oh, please, I know, I mean, really? They're not really heroes, and I don't know if you saw that movie, Civil War, very disappointing. But the photojournalist, who apparently you can take photos when you're moving the camera like this, which I didn't realize, but she's the hero, she's the moral conscience voice of the thing. Oh, stop it. But media doesn't reflect, and it's largely our fault, what Christianity is really about. So what is a story? Another one. Actually, that could be me. No, I turned it off. Donald Trump. A Christian refusing to get the COVID vaccine and being arrested and then raising a lot of money because of it. Crazy people screaming about abortion. Homophobia. Hypocrisy. I mean, what week are we in now? Another minister has either taken money or they've had sex with people outside of marriage. I mean, there's one just this week, I think, and the girl was 12 years old. And he referred to a young woman, and she said, I'm sorry, this happened, I was aged between 12 and 14 when he was doing this. Now, you understand why media cover that, because it is a story. But that's what people see, and they think it's hypocrisy. They're often unfair. They associate Christianity with the West. It's not fashionable to be pro the West anymore. I find that a bit lame, I really do. But that's also part of the attitude. Their parents went to church. They love their parents, but it's just not for us. Christianity is about telling us what we shouldn't be doing. You're going to talk about sin the whole time and say we have to live in a certain way. But I don't think many people say, well, I've really studied the arguments for the divine being and the notion of some form of intelligent design behind creation. And I've read the early works. I've read Josephus, and I've looked at the documents for the proof of Jesus. And I don't agree. You don't hear that very often. What you hear is, oh, they're nasty, and they don't like gay people. And it can be difficult. I don't personally evangelize on a daily basis. I try to do it with my writing and my preaching. But I think witness is really important. If you just live the life that you should, and I'm sure you do, and people know you're Christian, you will be amazed at the effect you have. And I've had people saying to me, like on Twitter, I don't get so many anymore, but I used to get lots of attacks, and I just made a point of never responding in anger. I'd mock them sometimes. I would mock them, but not nastily. Generally, I just block now. But if I did respond, it will be graciously. Not because I'm such a good person, because A, I know it drives them crazy, but the real reason is that I'm not writing to them or for them. I'm writing for the thousands of other people who are reading what I'm saying. Now, so some crazy person says, you're a pedophile. Yeah, I've only heard that 1,000 times. Now, if I write back and say, people will say, oh. But if I write back and say, it's a really hurtful thing to say, I'm the father of 4 children, but I forgive you. Well, he may change sometime. I have had some people say, I'm sorry. Generally not. But the people reading that, a lot of them will say, it's quite impressive. It's quite impressive. And you never know the message that you're sending, the calling card that you're leaving. If they do want to talk about your faith, always have a ready argument, as St. Paul tells us. Finding a good church, that can also be challenging. I find I'm a bit of an orphan, actually, politically and theologically in some ways, because I do regard myself as a pretty orthodox Christian who is a sort of social democrat, liberal politically. And it can be a lonely place to be, particularly as we're polarizing. I mean, golly, look at, Gaza, for example. And I've spent quite a lot of time in the Middle East. People on both sides. Israel can do no wrong, Israel can do no right. All of you, shut up. Let's talk about the people who are really involved. Let's listen to the voices on both sides that really are talking about peace, and there are many of them. Have you spent time with the Israeli peace movement? Anyway, I don't want to get into that issue particularly, but we're in a very judgmental, unforgiving, polarized age. But then that's not unique. It's quite a bleak time. But I suspect it was pretty bleak for my parents in 1940 in Britain as well. We're all very quite solipsistic. We're quite insular by nature. This is the worst it's ever been. It's not. It's not. There have been terrible times throughout history. But I would just almost let it come to you. And then, if someone says, why are you going to listen to that bloke? He's awful. Well, you could say, that wasn't my impression, unless it was, and don't say anything. But, have you read his book? Or go to YouTube and see what he had to say. And I would suspect most will say no. But if one of them says, all right, who knows what will happen? Leading people to Christ. I'm not really sure what that means, if I'm to be candid with you. I want to do it. I'm not entirely sure what it means. My wife is very bright, very educated, and she's a Roman Catholic. And years ago, and it was a long time ago because one of the kids was still in diapers, so the youngest one is almost 26, and we were speaking at this large evangelical church. And they knew that Bernie was Catholic, and she was changing one of the kids. She was changing the diaper, and there were these two women. And I want to be respectful, but they were pretty basic. And here's my wife with degrees coming out of everything. And they went up to her and they said, "Can we ask you a question?" And she's changing the diaper. She said, "Yeah." And they said, "We're a bit worried. Are you saved? Are you saved?" And my wife said, "Well, I'm working out my faith with fear and trembling. It's the best I can do." And they walked away, and I heard one of them say, "I'm worried about her." We always have to be sensible. We have to be sensitive. We have to be empathetic. Who are we dealing with? Who are we speaking to? I find a lot of indifference. I don't get much hostility from people. When I was first ordained, so I'm digressing here, but so this is going back a few years, and I was, about 2 weeks later, I was in Britain. I go to Britain every September, October. And I was wearing my collar, which I always do, because I do think it's important to represent. And I noticed that, generally there was indifference, but there was no hostility. But I noticed a couple of times outside pubs, makes me sound like I'm always outside a pub, but I'd be meeting people or whatever, and groups of guys in their 20s, early 30s would come out, a couple of drinks, and they were very affectionate, not in a nasty, and they'd say, "Oi, father, you all right, mate? You want a drink? Buy a drink, son, come on." And I said, "No, thank you very much, fine." And it happened a couple of times, and they were rowdy, not violent, but they were rowdy, and they were being sort of affectionate. And I said this to a friend, he's now retired, a priest. And he said, "Oh, yep. I said, "What do you mean, yep?" He said, "Well," it's happened to me a lot of times." He said, you'll find in that group there would have been a number who had either been in prison or had been in the army. And in those two institutions, the only humanity you see is the man in the collar. And I thought, blimey, that's really good. So you're in the army learning how to kill people, and obviously it's a very, by its nature, it has to be aggressive. It's not for the weak. But the person who shows humanity is the padre, the man in the collar. And you're in prison, violent, threatening society, and the person who shows humanity is the man in the collar, the person in the collar. And they represented. And it's not that either situation, they were tangibly converting people, but they were showing people, they were representing the love of Christ to people in difficult situations. And so that, there's a story that, it's not my story, I heard someone else tell it. And again, it's often a battlefield situation because I think it really, emotions are the most raw and dramatic. And it was, again, a man who lost a comrade in battle. And he wasn't even a particular friend, but he was just with him. And the guy didn't make it. And he said, would you please go to this address if you get out of this hellhole? Would you go to this address and just tell this man it all makes sense? It all makes sense now. It all makes sense now. And the guy didn't make it. And anyway, the other fellow was demobbed. He got out of the army. He went back. He was a Londoner. The address was in London, so he went to this address in London. He thought, I should do it, And he knocked on the door, and eventually the door was open, and there was an elderly man. And he said, look, I don't really know what this is about, but so-and-so, he died, I'm afraid. And he told me to come to this address and just to say it all makes sense now. And this elderly man began to weep. And the fellow thought he must be a relative. And he said, I'm really sorry. Are you related? He said, no. I said, I hardly knew him. He said, I was one of his teachers at school. And I taught him religion. And he'd never seemed to listen to a word. So you never quite know. You never quite know. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have time for one or two more? I'm not in control. I think you have to get the microphone first. You do, apparently. You do.
A question I would have is a journalist, a reverend, a Rhodes Scholar, part of the team on TV, Challenge, something to do with Challenge. Jim Sinclair, Pierre Burton, Tom Harper.
Yeah.
Ring a bell?
Yeah,
He wrote a book. His last book was The Pagan Christ.
Yeah.
Can you address that? Did you read it?
Yeah, I knew Tom.
Thank you.
Tom was Challenge. What was it? Challenge? What was that? I don't. Front Page Challenge? He wasn't on that, was he? Was Tom on Front Page Challenge? Don't think so. No, Pierre Burton was. I knew Pierre a little bit too. But I knew Tom. We shared a flight together. Nice man, Tom. Tom, when he was at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, he actually attended lectures from C.S. Lewis. Amazing. Lewis died in 1963, the same day as Kennedy. Kennedy, Aldous Huxley, and C.S. Lewis died the same day. And people didn't know C.S. Lewis was dead, not because of Aldous Huxley, but because Kennedy had been assassinated. And it dominated the news. So, the same day. I like Tom, a lovely man. The book, sorry, I'm not impressed. There's nothing new in it. The arguments he makes have been made for years, and I think modern scholarship wouldn't give it much room. There's not... those arguments have been made over and over again. He questions things that are no longer questioned. One of the wonderful things about Christianity is that the more we know, the more it seems to be true. For example, archaeology. There was very little archaeology that took place in that region under the Ottoman Empire. But there's been a lot in the last 40, 50 years. And there are things that we've found And suddenly what's said in the Gospels, you realize that's what they meant. And it's obviously, that's what they were referring to. We have more knowledge of language. Our knowledge of Aramaic and Koine Greek is better than it was. Like people talk about the King James Bible. Only the King James Bible. That was in the early 17th century. We know far more now. No, that's not a reliable translation. I can say this with absolute confidence. There is not a serious scholar in the academy who denies that Jesus existed. Now, there are many who would say he wasn't the Son of God. That's a different issue. And I know the academy quite well. I mean, you quoted, you said, Professor of History at Oxford, Sir Dermot MacCulloch, who's a dear friend, is one of the most eminent, I would say the most eminent historian of the Reformation in the English-speaking world. I mean, I do know the academy. There is not a serious scholar who would say Jesus didn't exist. We know he existed. Whether the miracles are true, whether he's the Son of God, that can be debated and discussed. Tom's argument, I forget some of it now, but a lot of his comparisons with other sacred writings, the similarities are very thin. It's not, I don't think the book is sufficiently researched. It's Tom at a stage in his life, and he was a lovely fellow, when he's lost faith. And I understand that. I knew Christopher Hitchens a little bit too. My first job was at the New Statesman in Britain, and Christopher was working there then. And once again, wonderful polemicist, brilliant mind, brave man, but his arguments about Christianity, they're not very good. He makes them beautifully, but they're not really very good. And I don't, with all due respect to Tom, and God rest his soul, I don't see it as a particularly serious work, I'm afraid. But, hey, read it, see what you think. If you want a really excellent book on the Bible by someone who many conservatives would not like, I would recommend John Barton. I don't know if you know John Barton. John Barton, he's not well, actually, now, but again, Oxford. John's book on the Bible, he's an Anglican Church of England priest, but conservatives don't like him. They would say what he writes is terrible, and he's one of these scholars you think, I can hold on to his coattails. They're so brilliant. They're so knowledgeable. And he says things that some people would take issue with. But he makes a wonderful argument. He says, well, if you believe in God, and I do, and God has given us a Bible, I think he has, why do you think God has made it that we argue about it, and we're not absolutely certain about every part of it? Is that God just being annoying? Or is that because God has a plan for us? But worth reading John Barton. Now, it's not easy to, this is challenging stuff, and his book on the Bible is this big. It won every award you can imagine. It's not that hard to win church press awards. I've won a few. But winning awards in the secular world is different. So John Barton, that is a very serious work. And there are things you can discuss. Did the birth take place in Bethlehem? Discuss. We could talk about that. Did Peter actually get to Rome? Paul certainly did. We can discuss that. Did Herod the Great actually kill all those children? It's very unlike Herod the Great. That wasn't his style. He killed a lot of people, but the idea of a genocidal approach, in fact, and Herod the Great was great in many ways, he was probably dead. He probably died in 4 BC. Now, his son, Herod, did he do that? Certainly capable of that. Certainly. Anyway, but these are issues we can discuss, but I don't think it alters the fundamental story. There is a lady behind you with a hand up.
Sorry. Just going on the tailgate of the questions around full inclusion. My husband and myself are the lead pastors of Shallow Lake Community Church. We are an evangelical church that started a journey towards inclusion, full inclusion, maybe about 8 years ago, which is quite interesting because the church was actually founded through the United Church split of ordaining homosexual priests, and our church were all the people that removed themselves from it. So we were known as the anti-gay church. I think we're kind of known now as the gay-loving church.
How times change.
But there has been, you know, the lady at the front was asking, how do you create a tough skin? I think you're going to learn it by being absolutely obliterated, because the reality of this journey for churches, if you survive, it will be down to pure luck. We have, over that period of time, once we took the vote for full inclusion, we went from about over 200 people. We are 30 people. There is a huge, huge consequence. But, and then the young woman, I absolutely agree, the younger generations, it is an absolute anathema to them, and one of the biggest reasons why they cannot be in church is because they see it as hatred. We see now that the arguments are becoming more and more stronger, and for new generations, they will take those arguments as absolutely making sense, just as it happened with women in leadership. I'm, from a pastor's point of view, and other people that want to pursue this journey, what would you give advice, or are you able to give advice to actual churches?
Right, okay. Where are you from, by the way?
I'm a southerner. My husband's a Brummie. That's where we met.
You're from Birmingham?
Warsaw. I'm not, but he is.
And where are you from?
Basingstoke.
All right. In Hampshire? Yeah. I've been to Warsaw, by the way. Yeah. Just outside of Birmingham. Ozzy Osbourne? Anyway. Peaky Blinders? Yeah. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I mean, it's not universal. There's a church in Toronto. I read a piece for TVO about it, which became fully affirming, and they were effectively thrown out of the denomination. Not in a nasty way. They could see it coming, but they're doing very well. And in England, there is, within the Church of England, there is a group, and I can't remember the name, it's because the Church of England has an evangelical and a Catholic wing, and a middle wing too. It's all, I won't get into it, but it's a different form of worship. There's now a progressive evangelical organization within the Church of England, because there are a lot of people who are more evangelical who on this issue are affirming, and they just don't think it's in any way an interference with their evangelical approach to Christianity. And I mean, it depends where you are. I wouldn't say that sexuality is the main issue young people aren't going to church, because the church where I work, we're fully affirming, and we do okay. I mean, we have 2 services on a Sunday, maybe 140 people, and we have some new people coming in. But younger people, they have other things to do on a Sunday. It just doesn't seem to appeal to them. The Catholic Church is different because it's still immigration-based and it's an ethnic issue. I think they're going to face problems in the next 20 or 30 years. Islam is very different indeed, but it's cultural. But look, it depends on your circumstance. The United Church, many United Churches, I would think the majority, are very affirming. And I have to be candid with you, they're not doing well. They're not doing well. I mean, you're selling off churches like crazy. Forgive me if this sounds rude. I think the reason is because, as well as being affirming, which is wonderful, they're watering down their Christianity. And I just don't think it appeals to people. And why would I go to church to hear what I'm hearing every day in the week? It's why I'm a little bit suspicious of contemporary music. Okay, fine if you want contemporary music, but I know from our kids, why would we want that? We got far better contemporary music if we go to a concert or put church. But you will be attacked, and it's become and this does really annoy me, it's become the litmus test for faith. If someone said to me, well, you don't believe in the divinity of Christ, and you don't believe that we're made in the image of God, and you don't believe in the creed, I'm sorry, you can't be a guest host on a Christian TV show. I would say, yeah, you've got a point there. As I know, when Catholic newspapers fired me, well, you're no longer a Catholic. Okay. But when you say, I know you believe all that, but you also believe in equal marriage, thus you can't be on the show. But, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have people who are divorced. We'll have people who have not treated their workers very well, and other issues which are directly addressed by Jesus. You will get pushback. For an evangelical church, it's particularly difficult because there is a certain culture at play. And even the more progressive evangelical think tanks and magazines. Christianity Today is not right-wing. I mean, it's often has very good articles in it. Philip Yancey, who you might know. Philip Yancey, lovely man, he wrote a column some years ago that wasn't completely on side on the issue, but he was questioning some of the more conservative theology around homosexuality. And he said to me, I've never had anything like it. I mean, it just went on and on and on. The hatred, the abuse, the threats. You scratch something. Look, it's partly to do with religion. It has a lot to do with many other things too. It's to do with people's insecurity. I'm not going to say that everyone who is anti-gay is actually gay. That's just facile. But I think there is insecurity around people. I think it's socialization. I know when I was attacked, and it was bad. I mean, videos of people at a gun range saying, this is coming for you. They never spoke about gay women. They never spoke about gay women. It was only about men, and they were obsessed with one sexual act, which actually is not, I don't want to get into details, I mean, you don't know what I mean, but it's not really even such an issue, and it's not confined to gay men either. Anyway, but you think, I don't want to sound Freudian here, but what's going on? Why are you so obsessed with this? And so you're dealing with more than a point of theology. It's almost as though they see their whole world collapsing if they compromise on this issue. And I believe there are many people, I won't say who it is, but there is a minister in a large, well, it has to be large by its nature, a mega church. I won't be specific. In the Greater Toronto area, the Greater Toronto area, there is a minister of a mega church. And he said to me, I brought up in committee, let's have a series of lectures and discussions about this issue. Let's just discuss. And a person said, if you do that, I'm resigning. It wasn't even, let's become affirming. Let's discuss. If you do that, I'm resigning. I can't think of another issue unless is Jesus God? Okay, well, that's so fundamental, I don't have a place here anymore. But what other issue would there be? I mean, but it has become the defining point of faith to a lot of people. That's why you're facing such hostility. But always remember, it is about far more than religion. I mean, you see it in people. You see the anger in them. And, I mean, it depends where you are. Urban areas, I think the response is different. I mean, I think in downtown Toronto or Hamilton, I think it's different, different attitudes. But it could be very difficult. I'm so sorry you've lost that many people. I mean, it's a hard one in any denomination. In the evangelical world, it's particularly difficult. But I do have a sense of optimism. I really believe that in the evangelical world, and it's pretty big in North America, there are lots of young people who, on two issues in particular, the environment and homosexuality, I know that's a cold term to use, I'm just being generic. On those two issues, they are simply not accepting older people, conventional wisdom in their churches, but they don't know what to do. They feel that if they question it, they won't have a place there anymore, and the real danger is they'll walk away from faith because of it. And I don't know if there's any way, I'm sure you've tried this, but an uncompromising evangelical church that believes in the love and acceptance of gay people. I don't know how many people you can appeal to, but I know there is a thirst for that amongst young people, because I have them writing to me saying, where can I go? Driving here, I'll do it when I get home, because it was on my phone, an email from a guy around this issue. His parents have disowned him, and you still get that. And where should he go? And he doesn't want to walk away from faith. He's not in this area. He's in, actually, no, he's not in Toronto. I think he's in Hamilton. But it is tough. It is difficult. You will be attacked. But all I can say is, if I can be of any help, do email me, because I have been there. I don't get it much now, but still a little bit. But there was an article about me on a right-wing Catholic, a big right-wing Catholic news site. And they were going after me, attacking me. And I don't usually read comments. The comment sections, I mean, a lot of newspapers have just got rid of them now. They're pointless. But I did have a look. And one comment said, well, what he has done is terrible, but you should know that one of his children is gay. It's news to me and to them, because they're all boringly straight, I'm afraid, sorry. But this is what was underneath it. Oh, I didn't know that. I still don't forgive him, which is pretty fundamental to Christianity. I still don't forgive him, but I do understand. I'd rather my child had cancer than was gay. I swear to you, that's what it said. Swear to you, that's what it said. Yeah. Is that it? We have time for... Wait, it's done. It's done. Thank you very much. What a way to end.
That's a great way to end.
Is it? I mean, not very upbeat.
Michael, thank you. Those people I quoted, the professor, Fry, Frum, were right. We have had lots of thoughts to think on as we move forward. And as an affirming working towards being an affirming congregation, we have had a very receptive congregation. Good. We have had no hate mail. And we will move forward with faith that when our vote comes, that if it doesn't pass, then we decide what we're doing and deal with that as it comes. But if it does pass, we will move on. And thank you ever so much.
Anytime, always here.
Thank you.
Just before I close in prayer, I want to do a little plug for Michael's book. He did not put me up to this, by the way. We discovered his book, about 6 months ago, maybe. We wish we had it at the beginning of our journey. So for those of you who are starting or in the midst of your journey, his book is amazing. We could have used it as an outline for all our lunch and learns. It really is valuable. It's well worth the $20.
I'm going to take you home with me.
Yeah. Can we close in prayer? Lord, we thank you for sending Michael today to share your message of love. We ask you, God, who created a world of diversity and vibrancy, to go with us as we embrace life in all its fullness. Take that stirring of love that we feel for each other and guide our steps to be faithful friends and extensions of your love to those that you have seated beside and across from us today. Lord, we look forward to the ways that you will surprise and amaze us with your faithfulness, the lives that you will touch, and the people in this room you will use to brighten dark spaces and lift sad hearts with the same note of passion created by you to help us to be light to the world, color to dullness, and life to dead places, love to lost faces. Amen.
I'd just like to make one note. We have taped today, and if there are any parts of it you'd like to see again, it will be on, if you go to our website, Sauble Beach United Church, you will find it listed under the Hamburg Watch. You can find it on YouTube. And you can watch it again, or you can tell a friend, and we'll share it that way. Thanks.
And there's coffee and tea and cookies in the back room.
Thank you for coming.